Hey everyone, let's dive right into today's explainer. We're going to be looking at this absolutely fascinating paradox in human psychology. It's this wild quirk where the exact same fact can either save you or completely scare you. Seriously, it influences almost every single choice we make, from the medical treatments we agree to all the way down to the groceries we throw in our carts. And crazy enough, it is all driven by just a few tiny words.
Okay, so picture this. You're sitting in a doctor's office, right? The doctor is looking down at a clipboard and they have to give you a statistic. Now, to one patient, they might say, this surgery has a 90% survival rate. But to another patient, maybe just across the hall, they say this surgery has a 10% mortality rate. Now, pause and think about that for a second. It is the exact same medical procedure, literally the exact same math. But as we're going to see, patients respond to those two sentences in completely opposite ways. One phrase saves you from worry, while the other, it scares you into an absolute panic.
This right here brilliantly illustrates what behavioral scientists call the framing effect. It's basically a cognitive bias where the decisions we make totally change based on whether information is presented as a gain or as a loss. And that happens even when the underlying facts are completely identical. What this tells us is actually incredibly profound. It means how something is said can actually matter so much more to our brains than what is objectively true. The frame dictates the feeling, And that feeling, well, it dictates the choice.
Let's get into Section 1, Prospect Theory, the science of loss aversion.
So to really understand why we fall for this framing bias so consistently, we've got to look at the groundbreaking work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Their core insight, and this is a real game changer, is that humans feel the pain of losing something roughly twice as strongly as the pleasure of gaining the exact same thing. It is definitely not a one-to-one ratio in our minds, because losing hurts just so much more. When a choice is framed as a potential loss, we tend to take these bigger, wilder risks just to avoid it. But flip it around, when that same choice is framed as a potential gain, suddenly we just want to play it safe.
Now, back in 1981, Kahneman and Tversky actually ran an experiment that completely shattered this whole illusion we have of rational decision-making. It's famously known as the Asian disease problem, and it's pretty much the foundational experiment for all framing research.
Let's step into the shoes of the participants for a minute. They were asked to imagine a hypothetical disease that was expected to kill 600 people. Then, they were given two different response programs to choose from. So I want you to think about this. Which one would you choose?
First up, the researchers framed the choice as a gain. They really emphasized the word saves. They told the participants, Program A saves 200 people for certain. Program B has a 1/3 chance to save all 600 and a 2/3 chance to save no one. When it was presented this way, really highlighting who gets to live, the vast majority of people played it super safe. They picked Program A. They wanted those 200 guaranteed saves, no questions asked. But here's where it gets wild. The researchers took the exact same mathematical choice and reframed it as a loss. This time, they emphasized who dies. They asked a completely different group. Program A results in 400 people dying for certain. Program B has a 1/3 chance nobody dies and a 2/3 chance all 600 die. Suddenly, just staring at that phrase, 400 people die for certain, most people flipped. They abandoned the safe route completely and overwhelmingly chose the risky option, Program B.
The absolutely crucial point here is this. Nothing about the actual outcomes changed at all. Think about it. If you save 200 people out of 600, well, 400 people die. The math is identical, the odds are identical. Literally, the mere shift from the word saves to the word dies was enough to completely reverse the majority decision. The same fact, depending entirely on how it was framed, totally altered human behavior.
Okay, moving on to Section 2, Everyday Framing, from the hospital to the grocery store. This isn't just some hypothetical lab curiosity with fictional diseases. This happens every single day in the real world. Research on medical decisions has shown time and time again that both patients and their physicians are way more likely to recommend or accept a treatment, say surgery versus radiation, when it's presented by its survival rate. Hearing 90% survival feels highly reassuring, right? So the treatment gets accepted. But hearing the exact equivalent, 10% mortality, that is highly alarming, and the treatment is often rejected. Once again, the exact same fact can save you or scare you. It literally dictates life-altering medical decisions.
But, hey, you don't even need a hospital setting to see this bias in action. Just think about your weekly trip to the grocery store. Researchers Irwin Levin and Gary Gauths set up this brilliant study to test how we perceive ground beef, based entirely on how its fat and lean percentages were framed.
So they took the exact same ground beef and packaged it two ways. One label said 75% lean, and the other said 25% fat. People who tasted the meat right after reading the 75% lean label consistently rated it as better tasting and just higher quality overall. But the people who read 25% fat, they rated the identical meat as lower quality. The actual fat content didn't change. The taste on their tongue didn't objectively change at all, only the frame did. And that, right there, is exactly why you will almost never see a package of meat at the supermarket proudly advertising its fat percentage.
Honestly, once you see this bias, I promise you're going to start noticing it everywhere. In marketing, you're always told you'll save 25% instead of having to pay 75%. In politics, a policy is smoothly described as closing a loophole rather than a new tax. In sales, it's don't miss out, which completely triggers our loss aversion rather than just saying it's a simple price cut. None of these are lies. The facts are identical, but the frame is deliberately chosen to dictate how those facts make you actually feel.
Which brings us to Section 3, the rationality debate. Are we just irrational?
Now, to be completely fair to the science here, not everyone agrees that this always proves humans are totally irrational. There's actually a very respected critique of this framing research floating around the scientific community. Some researchers argue that words in the real world never arrive free of implied context. Think back to our doctor earlier. If a doctor actively chooses to say 10% mortality instead of 90% survival, a listener might reasonably infer that the doctor is deliberately trying to signal seriousness or caution. Because in normal human conversation, we choose our specific words for a reason, right?
This counter-argument centers on something called pragmatic reasoning. Under this view, reacting more cautiously to a mortality frame isn't necessarily a cognitive bias or some flaw in your brain. It might actually be a very smart, pragmatic reading of the context. You're rationally inferring the speaker's intent based on the specific words they chose to highlight. So, the framing effect might not just be this knee-jerk reaction to raw numbers. It could be a highly sophisticated interpretation of human communication.
And finally, Section 4, your framing cheat code, taking back control. Look, whether it's a cognitive flaw or a piece of brilliant pragmatic reasoning, the reality is that feelings, not spreadsheets, drive the vast majority of our human decisions. So how do we protect ourselves? How do we make more objective choices? Well, the next time you're offered a discount at a store, or you hear a politician talk about a loophole, or you're given a survival rate at a clinic, I want you to take a breath and ask yourself one simple question. What would this look like framed the other way? Just force your brain to translate the math. That one simple habit allows you to see past the emotional frame and recognize that the exact same fact can save you or scare you. But really, it begs the ultimate question. Now that you know how easily your reality is shaped by a few carefully chosen words, who is really making your decisions for you?